Hey, DawgNation, good Tuesday morning to you. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. I'm glad you're with us. Do want to give you a quick programming note right here off the top. Our buddy Jeff Sintel, our normal featured guest here on Tuesdays, not going to be able to be with us today. He's got some stuff that he's taking care of, kind of away from the office for the next couple of days. So we'll catch up with Jeff later on, and we'll certainly look forward to speaking to him again soon. But Jeff, not here today, not on the phone with us today, so we'll catch up with him soon. The good news, though, is we'll still get some recruiting information from a special guest who was alongside Jeff this past Sunday at the Nike opening, or I should say the opening regional qualifier there in Atlanta. So information on Myles Murphy coming up, Tate Ratledge coming up, a lot of the big-time recruits. We'll still get that on today's show, just not from Jeff Sintel, who'll be back with us again very soon. A lot of other stuff to do today. Spring practice continues for Georgia today. I'm looking forward to being in Athens later on this afternoon. We'll kind of talk about that. And I want to start the show with something that hopefully is just really, really fun. Not all that serious, not that big of a deal, but hopefully just really fun. After all, we could use a dose of fun from time to time. So let's do that now as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
It has been serious around DawgNation as of late. A lot of harsh tones about discipline and leadership and player arrests and things of that stripe. So we'll do our part here on DawgNation Daily today to kind of veer in a more hopefully fun direction. Now I am going to talk about some of that stuff before the show's done today because I feel like you probably have to. But I, at least at the very beginning of the show, want to start off having what I think is a good bit of fun. Because I think there is something to be said for Georgia fans, maybe not always appreciating what you have. And I think we have an example of that when it comes to the venerable home of the Dogs itself, Sanford Stadium. Now, since Kirby Smart has been the coach of Georgia, one of the things that he is very good about doing is thanking the fans for the role that they play in making Sanford Stadium a really tough place for opponents to come to play. And I don't think there's any doubt that in this Kirby Smart era, big-time home games for Georgia have felt like big-time environments. Sanford Stadium, to me, has felt like a big-time venue. It's true in 2017. You remember after the game against Notre Dame, and Georgia played like the Cupcake Sanford in between that. But it's the SEC opener, Jake Fromm's first SEC start against Mississippi State. Remember how loud it was that day? Remember how intense it was that day? Kind of a embodiment of what the 2017 season was like in a lot of those kinds of games. And Kirby Smart after the game did what he does frequently, which is thank the fans for the role they played and all that. Here's Kirby from way back then.
The atmosphere I thought was awesome. It's what the atmosphere is supposed to be in the SEC in college football. We had student section full, crowd made an impact on the game, had them jump off sides early, and I can't thank our fan base enough for coming out and supporting these guys.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think that's what Kirby Smart says, and I think that the way that he says that is the right way to say it. This is what the SEC is supposed to be like, and we're doing a good job of creating that here in Sanford Stadium. Wasn't just true in 2017. You could have said the same thing in 2018 as well. In fact, Kirby Smart did. Remember, near the end of the season, traditional rival Auburn, revenge game for Georgia, having lost to Auburn in its own stadium back at the end of the 2017 season. Great atmosphere, not only during the game while the Georgia crowd's making it tough on Auburn, but even before the game as well with the dog walk. And as Kirby explains, that kind of stuff has a way of just benefiting more than the actual opponent that you're playing. It can have reverberations for your program for a long time to come through recruiting. Here's Kirby on that subject as well.
I want to thank our fan base. You know, that was one of the most incredible dog walks I've ever been a part of. The environment tonight created pregame was electric. It probably has a lot to do with the fact we were playing a top 25 team, but we also had a night game. But you can't find a better place to play in college football. Our players love it. Coaches love it. Recruits love it.
So you may be wondering, why are we talking about this? What does this have to do with anything? Kirby complimenting Georgia fans and talking about how good the atmosphere has been for Georgia in some of these games over the last couple of years. The reason why I bring this up is because I happen to notice, somebody sent this to me on Twitter, USA Today has kind of a, I don't even know what you call it, sort of like a sports blog type thing called For the Win. And we are, as the young folks like to say, we are in the middle of bracket season right now, not just March Madness with the official NCAA tournament, but every website's got its kind of alternative bracket of favorite snack food, favorite cereal, favorite action movie, favorite blah, 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 blah. Well, For the Win USA Today has top sports stadiums, field of 64 bracket. Now, I don't quite know how to take this. This is partially good news, maybe partially not good news. depending on your perspective of Sanford Stadium. But if you're watching on video, we'll show you the full bracket here, and I'll need to be able to use this. So Georgia does make the field, and this is not a field of 6. Yeah, it is. It's a field of 64. No, field of 32, excuse me. This is a field of 32 top stadiums in college football. You got a college, all sports. You got a college football bracket, an NFL bracket, a Major League Baseball bracket, and a basketball bracket, which includes some college basketball teams and some pro teams. So Georgia in the college football bracket is the number 6 seed. Georgia was a number 6 seed in this, which you may say is a little too low, but pretty impressive. It looks like Georgia has pulled the upset in round 1, knocking off the Horseshoe Ohio Stadium as the 3 seed. So Georgia now moves on to round 2 to take on the Big House at Michigan. So if you're curious here, and I'll try to do this really, really fast. The college football venues that make this: Tiger Stadium, known as Death Valley; Beaver Stadium, the place that Penn State plays; Rose Bowl, which is also the home for UCLA; Kyle Field for Texas A&M. I mentioned Ohio State and Georgia both in here, and then Michigan, and then Outson Stadium, the very loud ballpark where Oregon plays, makes this as well. Then the NFL places are pretty much what you'd expect. The Major League places are pretty much what you'd expect. I don't know how Petco Park in San Diego is a 1 seed in this. I've not been to Petco Park. I've been to a lot of these other ballparks. Been to Wrigley, been to Fenway, been to did San Francisco not make this? I mean, San Francisco, yeah, okay, it does. San Francisco is probably the nicest ballpark in Major League Baseball. But nonetheless, Sanford Stadium is a 6 seed, and it upsets Ohio Stadium, the Horseshoe, as the 3 seed, now moving on to round 2. I'm assuming folks can go to For the Win and actually vote on this. Maybe we should put a link up for that. I don't mean to give USA Today more business, but maybe we can put up a link so people can go vote for Sanford Stadium to knock off the Big House. My guess is Michigan, just given the fame that stadium has, is probably a point spread favorite over Sanford Stadium in round 2 of the stadium bracket here. But nonetheless, my point in bringing all this up though is that it's not so much that I think the country sometimes doesn't give Sanford Stadium and Georgia enough credit. I would suggest that from time to time, maybe Georgia fans don't quite realize how cool of a venue Sanford Stadium really is. I think that Sanford Stadium, to me, has just about everything that a classic stadium venue is supposed to have. First of all, it's got a great nickname. All great stadiums have great nicknames. You got, the house that Ruth built. You got the friendly confines. Well, Sanford Stadium's nickname of Between the Hedges, everybody knows what that is. You hear that reference on ESPN all the time. That's a nationally known emblem associated with Georgia. That's a really good nickname. I think to be a great stadium, you got to have a great nickname. And I think that Georgia's got a really good nickname. I would also suggest to be a great stadium, you have to have some kind of nice view. It has to look a little different than other places do. And if you live in Georgia your whole life, you may not appreciate this. But one of the things I hear from outsiders all the time, people who come into Athens to come see a game that live in other places, that the terrain just doesn't look this way. When you look out across that west end zone over the bridge, which is also kind of a famous landmark kind of associated with the stadium, when you look over the bridge and you see those rolling hills, you see, that kind of view, it's kind of a distinctive topography, which is probably a bigger word than I should be using, but a distinctive topography that goes along with what Athens is all about. And I think that kind of adds to the ambiance that makes Sanford Stadium legitimately one of the best venues in all of college football. The other thing I'll add to this is, and the reason why I played the Kirby Smart audio off the top, is that I've been going to Georgia games for, I don't know, I'm 42 now. I guess I went to my first game when I was about 3. Started going regularly by the time I was 5 or 6. So I've been literally going to Georgia games for more than 30 years, 30 plus years. I've been going to Georgia games, for a long time. I think it is probably fair to say that in my era of attending games, late 80s, early 90s, I don't know that Georgia was always a really intimidating place to play. I don't know that you would have always said the UGA atmosphere is intense. Maybe those of you who are a little older than me that were going to the games during the Irk Russell era, which is a little bit predating me, or certainly the Herschel Walker era, you're going to say, well, back then, BA, you should have seen it back then. It was rocking and rolling. It was raucous. Maybe it was back then when Georgia was winning SEC championships 3 consecutive seasons. That's a little bit predating my memory. My memory is mid to late 80s, early 90s, heading into the start of the Mark Richt era, when I don't know this was always a really intense place to play. But I don't think you can say that as a problem anymore. I think when you look at what you see on the typical college Saturday now, Kirby references Mississippi State from 2017, Auburn from 2018. You can pick out really any of the big games that Georgia's played in the last few years. Crowd noise, no problem whatsoever. Crowd noise for Georgia fits right into the rest of the SEC discussion. So I don't know. I don't know what you do with this. Like I said, this is mostly just kind of fun to start off with here today. But I was kind of proud to see Georgia mentioned among some of these other top stadiums in college football. And I, for one, feel like Georgia in Sanford Stadium fits pretty well into that discussion. So we'll see how Georgia progresses in this For the Win USA Today bracket. But I guess just a way of reminding Georgia fans to actually appreciate the fact that every single fall Saturday when you go to Athens to Sanford Stadium, I think you're going to one of the best venues in all of college football. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Good to have you with us here in our own friendly confines of our DawgNation World Headquarters studios, live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We're also on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we are available as a podcast wherever podcasts can be found. The Apple Podcast Player, the Google Podcast Player, the world-famous DawgNation.com. We try to make the show easy for you to find, and we've got even more ways for you to catch up with DawgNation content coming up in the very near future. Stay tuned for a big announcement on that. Really, very soon, we've got some exciting stuff to unveil. I also want to get a little bit more serious now. We had some fun with Sanford Stadium off the top. We got to get into the discussion on spring practice here in a moment, because Georgia's going to be back on the practice field today. I'll be in Athens a little bit later on. I think there's some key issues we got to examine just a bit as Georgia moves on to what I believe is spring practice number 4. Y'all correct my math on that, but I believe it's spring practice number 4. I'll also tell you a quick programming note. Normally on Tuesdays, Jeff Sintel here for our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All. Jeff had some personal business to take care of. Believe it or not, Jeff actually has a life away from the recruiting wars and the build-up for the 2020 class. So Jeff taking some time on that today. No Mr. Sintel today. We do have a very special guest filling in for Jeff on our show today. A guy that stood alongside him at the Atlanta opening regional qualifier on Sunday, where a lot of folks punched their ticket to the big recruiting event of the summer, and gave us some insight into how they feel about the recruiting process, including a couple names you've been looking to hear some more information on. Connor Riley was there with Jeff Sintel. A lot of you hear Connor as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down after the show each day on DawgNation Daily. So Connor going to fill in with Jeff and give us some insight from what he saw and heard from the Atlanta opening regional qualifier from this Sunday. Before we get to any of that, though, recruiting news, let me kind of get into some of the spring practice stuff, because I feel like there are right now a handful of open issues for Georgia going through the rest of practice and heading towards G-Day, and Kirby has given us some insight on that, and I think that we're going to look to get some additional insight on what I think are some pretty important issues facing Georgia that may not necessarily get the big headlines. If you watch TV, listen to the radio, kind of old school, classic media, some of this kind of stuff doesn't get talked about. But for Georgia fans, they are thinking a lot about some of this kind of stuff. One of those things in particular is the need to replace last year's terrific center, Lamont Gilliard, who put together a great Georgia career, became a really impressive mainstay of that offensive line, but as college players do, he has exhausted his eligibility, and now he moves on to the next phase of his life or the next level of play. That means that Georgia is looking for a new center. What I thought was interesting from Kirby Smart when he spoke last week was he came about as close as I think you're going to ever hear him endorsing a player in a competition. I'm not going to try to pretend to tell you that the center competition is over, but it's not like Kirby to say there's a leader. In this case, though, it certainly sounds like there is one. Here is what Kirby Smart said about one player in particular in that center competition.
Trey Hill played there against Kentucky. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to mind is here's a guy who played in a go win the SEC East type game against a really tough defense, and he was thrown and thrust right into the limelight. So we'll have a group by committee. We'll be working 3 guys there a lot of time. Clay will get some reps there. Jamari will get reps there. Trey will get reps there. We'll have a lot of guys working through there, but Trey's the guy that's kind of been walking through and taking the most reps, and he's gotten some experience already, which is valuable.
I mean, I think that's a really strong endorsement from Smart to Hill. I'm not necessarily surprised about it, but I do think that what Smart says about Hill there leads you to a couple of other questions. First of all, one of the names you don't hear mentioned there is Warren Erickson, and we'll kind of find out, I think, from Kirby more in the future about how Erickson fits into this competition, especially given the fact that many of us went into the spring believing that Clay Webb was hopeful of starting his Georgia career at guard and then maybe migrating to center later on. So there's some stuff to deal with there. But there's also what all this means for Jamari Salyer, who was a highly, highly touted and still is a highly regarded prospect from Georgia's 2018 class. And yet many people thought maybe center would be the eventual position that he landed on at Georgia. Of course, Trey Hill, because he played center with Jake Fromm there at Houston County, has always been in that discussion. But the rise of Hill in this position, what does that mean for Salyer, another greatly respected young offensive lineman in this program? Now, there's only room for 5 guys to play at once, and Georgia's got way more than 5 good offensive linemen right now, Salyer among them. But watching how the emergence potentially of Hill at center impacts Jamari Salyer, I think is also something worth watching here. Let me also mention this as well, another open position where competition's taking place. Georgia has lost a lot of wide receivers. McCole Hardman, Terry Godwin, Riley Ridley, all on their way to the NFL. In particular, on the inside there, what's next for Georgia, that slot receiver position? Kirby was asked about Kearis Jackson, a guy going into his second year at the program and a guy that a lot of fans have high expectations for. What does Kirby think about Kearis right now? Here's what he said on Tuesday.
It's going to be a common theme. You guys are going to ask me 1,000 times about the receivers over the next whatever number of days this is. I think Kearis is a guy that's going to have to come out and compete. He's going to get plenty of opportunities because when you look at the production gone, who's going to replace that production? Well, the first in line are the guys that are here right now, not necessarily the 3 or 4 guys that are coming in. So I'm extremely excited about Kearis's work ethic. He was a guy that was really in the year and then all of a sudden had a hamstring in camp and it kind of held him back. But I'm excited to see what he does, and there's a lot of other wideouts I could say, and hey, these guys are going to go out there and we're going to find out what they're about. We're going to see if they can go out and compete and go against the best and make plays.
So I think it's really interesting. Kirby gives you a lot there. I do think Kearis is one of those guys that's just an interesting prospect. As I've said before, he's got a little bit more beef than you might think from a typical kind of inside receiver. I think you can use that to his advantage. The other thing that Kirby says, I think candidly, which is probably true, is that the guys who have been here do have a little bit of a leg up early on over guys who are coming in. Now, Kirby mentions the potential of 3 of those names. Obviously, one of those, the graduate transfer, Lawrence Cager. Kirby can't talk about him by name yet, but he's on his way. Then you got 2 freshmen as well, and George Pickens and Dominic Blaylock. So Kirby says, hey, maybe a little bit of an edge and advantage for the guys who've been through these rigors, been doing this, learning the way things go. The other guys got to get their sea legs under them just a bit. But that wide receiver competition, I think, is a lot of fun. I think I used the word fun specifically on purpose because ultimately I think the results of this are going to lead Georgia to have good receivers on the field. The way all of this worked itself out during these spring practices, I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. There's also more from spring practice I think that's worth paying attention to. I am out of time for now, so let me push that to later on in the show. We'll deal with some more of that kind of stuff coming up. For now, though, it is a Tuesday. You've come to expect recruiting news here on DawgNation Daily. I want to give that to you. No Jeff Sintel, but that won't stop us. Our buddy Connor Riley was with Jeff at the Atlanta event on Sunday. Big news here, including a heavyweight battle between Georgia and Clemson for a top-tier prospect. Let's talk all kinds of recruiting here on DawgNation Daily.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So this is now for a guy that, for those of you that watch on video, you hear this voice a lot. For those of you who are radio listeners, podcast listeners, you don't hear it quite so much, but you see the name at DawgNation.com all the time. Making his first appearance on the DawgNation Daily proper, so to speak, the official broadcast of DawgNation Daily is our buddy Connor Riley. Connor, thanks for pinch hitting for Jeff Sintel. We appreciate you being with us and hope you're doing well today.
Thanks, BA. Thanks for having me on, and just want to say I wish Jeff was here.
Well, I always wish Jeff was here. He's always doing a great job, but we know that you were doing a great job there as well. And I want to get some of the specific names that you had a chance to see on Sunday, some of the stuff that you have going on there. But before we kind of get into that, just give me a little bit of an overview, because I've not been to this particular event. Most people listening right now have not been to an Atlanta opening regional qualifier. That's a lot of words. Give us a little bit of an idea for what this event even is, and then we'll get to some of the individual guys who are there.
Yeah, so basically this is a mix of a combine, sort of, and then you get a lot of guys working out together, athletic testing. And then you also do get to see a lot of one-on-one reps, defensive linemen versus offensive linemen, linebackers versus running back, wide receivers versus defensive back, quarterback, throwing guys. Wow, it's sort of it's not as big as it used to be. All the top prospects used to come out for this. The way to get invited to the Nike opening when it used to be up in Beaverton, Oregon. Now it's a little bit of a smaller event. Broderick Jones, 5-star Georgia offensive tackle, he wasn't there this weekend. and it was just with a lot of stuff and track stuff going on. There were a lot of guys who normally would have been there in years past who weren't there, but there was still a star-studded field. Guys like Myles Murphy, Tate Ratledge, Gilbert, name a few of the big name stars that are all targets that were there.
Well, let's talk about some of those in particular. Let's talk about Tate Ratledge here for a moment. Jeff had a great piece with Ratledge at DawgNation.com. There's also some terrific video. You can go to the DawgNation YouTube page and see more of that. When Jeff's with us later on in the week, I want to talk to him about his insight on Ratledge because I thought some of the quotes that he got from Ratledge were really interesting. And I guess there are two things to deal with here, Connor. First of all, there's this. It certainly seems like another example of Sam Pittman's relationship building efforts, once again showing a lot of fruits. It certainly seems like Ratledge has had a very favorable impression of Sam Pittman, which is really good news. But I'm also interested in your evaluation of Ratledge as a player. You're watching these drills closely. If you're watching on video, you can see some of this on the screen right now. I talked to you off air about this a little bit earlier in the week. It sounds like you came away from this event with a really strong opinion of who Ratledge is as a player, and I think that's an important thing to pair with Ratledge's feelings about Georgia, which you can read at DawgNation.com.
Yeah, Jeff, wrote a long, lengthy article yesterday morning, and then we got a chance to talk to Ratledge after the event. Sam Pittman has sort of done it again. Clay Webb talked a lot about his relationship with him, and that was the biggest reason he ended up going and coming to Georgia, and I think it's going to be something similar along the lines with Ratledge. He really talked about with the sense of admiration in his voice for Pittman. And he also gave some praise to Kirby Smart. There was a photo he tweeted out this weekend of him getting some one-on-one time with Kirby, the indoor facility. He really has a very strong relationship with Kirby Smart, both in terms of a football one, but also in terms of an off-field one. As far as an evaluation, have you ever seen the movie Roadhouse?
I have.
Ratledge was doing his best Patrick Swayze impersonation this weekend. He was just bodying guys. You've got the video up right now.
Yeah.
Just throwing guys all over the field. And it's not like, these are no-name guys. I mean, Andy Boykin is a 4-star defensive tackle, one-time Auburn commit, someone who's between Auburn and Alabama right now, it sort of seems like. Ratledge just owns him. And he was a really impressive right tackle. He's continued to grow from when he first sort of came on the scene a few years ago. He's now listed at 6'7", 310 pounds. He is someone who, you don't want to put a lot of pressure on him, but it's easy to see if he comes to Georgia next year, he is someone who, if Isaiah Wilson were to leave, he is someone who could certainly be a candidate to come in at that right tackle spot and play right away.
Yeah, and I think that you use a really important word there when it comes to Ratledge, where Georgia just needs true tackles. It's one of the things that Jeff Sintel, I think, has done a really good job of chronicling over the last few months, that as much success as Georgia's had in recruiting overall, offensive line in particular, that doesn't mean that Georgia doesn't have some needs at the offensive tackle position. I think most of us expect Andrew Thomas to be gone from Georgia after the season, and it's certainly a possibility that the draft-eligible Isaiah Wilson at least could consider leaving after the 2019 season as well. Even if that doesn't happen, Georgia still has more interior than kind of outside offensive linemen. And so for a guy like Ratledge, who based on the film that I'm seeing, looks like a tackle that was built in a factory, looks like it was actually designed by engineers to play the offensive tackle position, that makes, I think, him a really valuable commodity, I believe.
Yeah, and now that he's in that sort of 6'7" range, he's still got he can still put on some weight and get even bigger. But assuming Thomas does move on, which if I were betting money on it, I'd bet good money on it just because he's projected to be a top 10, maybe even a top 5 pick next year. Wilson, it's you like to see a little bit more from him this year, but it's certainly a possibility Georgia fans have to consider. But based off what I saw and what Jeff Sintel saw on Sunday, if Georgia brings in Broderick Jones, who's top 20 overall player, and it brings in Ratledge, who's the number 52 player in the class and is probably going to climb based off how he performed at the opening this week. He was the offensive line MVP for the event. Georgia fans should feel at least as comfortable as they can with these two guys as possible replacements. I
want to talk about Myles Murphy in a second. Let me do one more thing on Ratledge before we move on, though. Based on the whispers that you were hearing there, the chatter that was going on, how serious of a threat would a school like Tennessee be? Geographically, they're a little closer. Tennessee's had success recruiting offensive linemen. 2 impressive 5-star tackles signed for the 2019 class. Are the Vols a name that Georgia fans should take seriously when it comes to this competition for Tate Ratledge?
I don't know how seriously he should take them, but it's pretty clear Georgia's, I think, safe to say, at the top right now. And then Tennessee, there's a little bit of a gap between them. And then you have schools like Alabama trying to get back into it. Because at one point they were considered the contender for him. But it's really I would say Georgia at the top, and then Tennessee maybe a step below them right now.
All right, so good stuff there. Let me move on to the Myles Murphy situation, and I tell this to Jeff Sintel all the time, and I think that you can't say this enough, that my favorite thing about Jeff is, and of course for those of you just joining us either on radio or video, Jeff had to take care of some personal business today. He's not with us today. Our buddy Connor Riley pinch hitting for him. Connor was with Jeff at the big recruiting event this past Sunday. But my favorite thing about Jeff is when there is good news to deliver involving Georgia recruiting, Jeff is the first guy there to put it up on a silver platter. He knows that Georgia fans are going to want to devour it. When there's the opposite kind of news, I think Jeff knows it's his duty to give it to us, give it to us unfettered and unfiltered the way that it actually is. And I don't know, Connor. I read the thing with Myles Murphy yesterday, a player for the 2020 class that I think that Georgia really needs. I kind of come away from that piece at DawgNation kind of feeling like this is more an example of the latter than the former. This is more of an example right now of you better be glad it's only March as opposed to, hey, it's only March. A lot of things can change. Right now, Georgia fans' time is actually on their side, knowing that it's going to take seemingly a lot to kind of, I don't know, get Georgia back in this discussion, heavy with Clemson, a little bit with Auburn. As of right now, I don't come away from this thing with Jeff Sintel thinking much more than right now Georgia's a bronze medalist for Myles Murphy, and that's not exactly the news that I'm looking for when it comes to this player, who I think is just a crucial component of the ideal 2020 class of the Bulldogs.
Yeah, after Jeff and I talked with Murphy on Sunday, I said to him, BA's not going to like the news he just heard. Georgia has some work to do with Myles Murphy. I think, based off of the comments he made, Georgia's behind Clemson right now. It's behind Auburn right now. Now, sort of laying out his thought process here, based off of what he had said, he wants to go. Academics are going to be a factor for him. He really likes Clemson, their engineering program. Auburn has a strong engineering program. Georgia is trying to get that engineering program up and running. You see guys like Nolan Smith in there, Clay Webb in there. And one thing Murphy mentioned is, because he's been to a number of Georgia games, he was there for the Auburn game last year. One thing that he mentioned is the next time he comes to Georgia, which it might be for G-Day, it's unknown yet when that will be, he really wants to sink his teeth in the academics and where that'll sort of factor in with Georgia. But there's a long way to go in his recruitment still, but as you sort of alluded to off the top, it's a good thing signing day isn't next week, because if it were, I don't think Georgia would be getting Murphy's services. I
mean, this is one of those moments where I have to be matter of fact about this. As well as Georgia's recruited, and I've been very happy with Trey Scott in particular. I think that, there's a lot to like about the names that he's added. I like the commitments from 2020, Jamil Burrows and Nazir Stackhouse. I like those guys a lot. I was thrilled with, obviously Trayvon Walker. Who wouldn't be thrilled with that? But if Scott, who I'm going to presume is heavily involved in both these recruitments, if Georgia were to lose both Brian Brzee and an in-state guy like Myles Murphy, I don't even care if it's not a position of need, because right now I don't know that Mr. Murphy's really all that much of a position of need given the pass rushers that Georgia has in the program. But you can't lose Brzee and Murphy. I feel like at that point in time you'd have to criticize Georgia's effort on this, and you'd have to say that's a pretty big blight on the 2020 resume if you're losing those two, I think, future game wreckers on the front seven of a defense. If you were to lose both those guys to Clemson, I think that's a bad look for Georgia.
I'm going to push back on that just a little bit. I certainly understand where you're coming from, but I think Clemson, with just the number of defensive linemen they've developed in recent years, from guys like Shaq Lawson to guys like Christian Wilkins and Ceylon Farrell, who are going to be first-round draft picks in this year's draft, Clemson is a very attractive school for defensive line prospects. And, as we've noted on the show before, Clemson has had no problem coming into the Atlanta area and going out, pulling top recruits out of the state. If there's one blight you want to put on Kirby Smart's recruiting resume, it's that he hasn't landed the best player in the state of Georgia yet in any of his recruiting classes. Now, he's recruited very well. He's signed multiple top 5 players from the state in each class, but that trophy fish, that 3,000-pound marlin, which Murphy would almost certainly qualify as, he hasn't gotten yet. But again, there's a long way to go with both Murphy and with Brzee. I think the thing to watch with Brzee is, does he come for G-Day? I think that's a very positive sign if it is. And I think the longer the Brzee recruitment goes on, I think the better that bodes for Georgia. And the same can be said for Murphy, because we know Clemson, they like to get their business done early. They like to get the recruiting done before the season starts at the end of August. The longer these recruitments drag out, and Murphy didn't sound too close to a decision at all. So the longer the Brzee and Murphy recruitments drag out, I think that bodes better for guys like Trey Scott and Kirby Smart to land these big fish.
All right, let's do some kind of stuff kind of quick here for a moment. I had a chance to see some of the video that y'all shot on Sunday of Arik Gilbert, the tight end from Marietta. So help me, if he got drafted in 2 weeks, I wouldn't. I mean, he just looks like a guy that's about to be in the NFL. He stands head and shoulders over other guys at the camp. I'm assuming in person he's as impressive as he is on film.
Yeah, he wasn't, as big when I first saw him, but maybe that's just because I had spent all morning looking at guys like Myles Murphy and Tate Ratledge. But then when you see him compared to other wide receivers, he really just stands out. And, he might not be that traditional tight end, but, man, Georgia can split him out wide, move him around, sort of like how the Patriots used Rob Gronkowski, where they didn't always put him in line. They split him out wide and just made him a matchup nightmare. Arik Gilbert can absolutely be that. There's Jeff Santel's talked a little bit about, the possibility of Gilbert and Darnell Washington, the 5-star tight end prospect out of Las Vegas, playing together. And we raised that question with Gilbert, and he didn't, he wasn't upset at the notion at all. He knows that there's a very well-defined role where he can come to Georgia, be a pass catcher. I think that's the sort of best way to describe him. He's sort of in between the wide receiver and the tight end. But, given his athleticism, it wouldn't surprise me at all if we saw him lined out wide a lot and just Georgia sort of use him as that in addition to flexing him in as a tight end.
That's really interesting. Let me stay with the same high school for a moment. Marietta with B.J. Ojulari. Obviously, Georgia fans like a lot about Azeez Ojulari, one of the 2018 signees there from the Blue Devils. Is it as simple as saying that B.J. is a clone of his brother, and because Georgia was as successful as it was recruiting Azeez, the recruitment for B.J. will be easy too? Is it that simple when it comes to Ojulari, Connor?
Yes and no. I got to spend some one-on-one time with Ojulari, and he stressed that playing time is something that he's looking at. And, if you look at that outside linebacker position, there are a lot of guys there, including his brother, I think has a very good chance of being a starter for Georgia in 2019. But, BJ, he says his brother's on him a lot, both in terms of helping him figure out the recruiting process and possibly coming to Georgia. Azeez very much wants BJ there. As far as players, they're very different. Azeez is more of a power guy, a guy who can move around, whereas B.J. Ojulari is pure speed. I mean, we saw him go against a guy we're going to talk about a little bit later here in Micah Morris, but he can get around that edge very quickly. He's got to put on a little bit of weight, but he's an incredible athlete coming from that edge rusher position. And, Georgia, they're certainly in it for him. I think it's similar to a Tate Ratledge and to an Arik Gilbert as well. The Georgia-Tennessee battle. Tennessee has sort of made a point to go after those big high school programs that produce a lot of recruits, guys like Marietta. They brought in Ramel Keaton last year. They have a commitment from Harrison Bailey this year. They go after Grayson. They get Wanya Morris. They go after Camden County. They got a guy like J.J. Peterson 2 years ago. That's sort of where they're going after their recruiting, and I think they're trying to build a pipeline to Marietta. So it's going to be on Georgia to really want to bring in a guy like B.J. Ojulari when they're not going to bring in a ton of outside linebackers and convince him to come.
Let me squeeze in one more final one because you mentioned the name. That's Micah Morris. Now, on this program, I don't think we've hardly talked any 2021 recruiting yet. First of all, that sounds like flying car age, but it's really only one recruiting cycle away. But sounds like a young man. You mentioned Camden County, from Micah Morris from down there in the Georgia coast at Camden County. Sounds like this 2021 offensive lineman made a bit of a name for himself this weekend, too.
He is the next superstar offensive lineman. He is very young. Wow. I think he doesn't turn 16 until August. And you can kind of tell that he's still a little raw when it comes to, the finer things of being an offensive lineman. But when he figures it out and puts it all together, and again, he's a guy who's already sung the praises of Sam Pittman. If he gets the right coaching, he is going to be an absolute monster at the next level. Someone who I 100% believe could come in, start right away as a true freshman if he continues to progress the way he has. I mean, we see him here going up against B.J. Ojulari. Ojulari is a year older than him, one of the top 100 players in the country, and Morris more than holds his own there. And, the difference between Morris and Ratledge was doing a lot of his work at the right tackle position, which, traditionally, left tackle is a little bit more difficult of a position just given where guys line up. Morris more than held his own on Sunday. One of the top players overall that we saw there, and someone who is going to continue to get better and better and going to be a major target for Georgia fans to know in the years to come.
I hope you'll follow Connor Riley's work at DawgNation.com. Good Day UGA. He wakes you up every single morning with that at the website. Also look for those Around the Doghouse features, much the same way you hear us doing Around the Doghouse here on DawgNation Daily. Connor does that for you at DawgNation.com as well, and also a really good voice following the recruiting wars very, very closely. Connor, thanks for your time here today on DawgNation Daily, and we appreciate all the work you're doing behind the scenes every day for us
thanks
here
for
as
having
well.
me, BA.
Good stuff there from Connor Riley.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, really good stuff, really fun there. I love getting these updates on some of these big names when it comes to recruiting. And, when it comes to Myles Murphy stuff, Connor jokes and says, BA's not going to like this, and I don't. I mean, I have to admit that right now that Myles Murphy recruitment is not where I want it to be. But, listen, getting the news and getting the truth about where it is a very important thing. So glad to be able to get that from Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily today and on Jeff Sintella at DawgNation.com. So make sure you check out more from Jeff on that. We'll look forward to speaking to Jeff a little bit later on in the week. By the way, let me mention this for a moment. Speaking of, I guess in a weird way, recruiting, Georgia Tech offensive line coach, offensive coordinator, a lot of titles, I guess. Brent Key, former Alabama assistant, had a tweet that he had to delete. We talked yesterday about Brandon Adams passing, the guy that has the same name as me, Georgia Tech player, shockingly passing away over the weekend. Just a devastating piece of news. And Key had a tweet that he deleted. I'm sure he almost feels terrible about, completely regrets. We do have the screen grab, though, because on the internet this stuff is forever. Key, what he tweeted, in case you were curious, he says that Georgia Tech will continue to attract great men. Today we lost a great man, and we gained another great man. Even in dark days, the future is bright. So Key is referencing a recruit, the program guy, while also referencing the death of Adams. This is a disastrous tweet. It's been described as tone deaf over and over again. I guess my take on this may surprise some of you just a bit. I think when it comes to stuff like this, though, I think we would, as a society, do pretty well, and especially as kind of the subgroup, which is the college football community. Can we let a guy up off the mat on something like this? Do we have to just beat him to a pulp on Twitter to make ourselves feel better? He misspoke. He said a bad thing. It is horrible to equate a death to a recruit. You can't tie those two things together. I think he knows that. I think that he probably just said the wrong thing. Saying the wrong thing is the kind of thing that happens in all walks of life all the time. And listen, there's nobody would love to kind of poke at a Tech assistant, especially with all the, the boasting and the bragging that Jeff Collins has been doing. There's nobody, there's no one that would like to poke at a Tech assistant, especially a former Alabama assistant, more so than me. But I'm also not for this gotcha culture where every time somebody does something wrong on Twitter, including something like this that is legitimately in poor taste, I'm just not for the pile-on this. By the time that Deadspin gets involved, it's gone way too far for me. And I think that Deadspin's now captured this and kind of, gotten in all on it. And we all feel better because we make somebody, feel really bad on the internet. But we are a part of real-life conversations where people say the wrong thing all the time, and we just kind of move on. I'd like to see that exist on Twitter a bit more, too. But nonetheless, bad day for Georgia Tech assistant Brent Key. Missouri is officially appealing its NCAA sanctions. You may have followed this story. They are right now facing a 2019 bowl ban because of a whole bunch of stuff that's gone on there in the past. And I guess just by virtue of the appeal, as long as they haven't heard the findings of this appeal, they don't have to sit out the 2019 postseason, which, if I'm Missouri, probably makes some sense. On paper, it's a pretty good team this year. It's a potential top 25 team with Kelly Bryant at quarterback and some of the other work that Missouri's done. So of all the years to not face a postseason ban, you'd probably rather not face one now than later. Almost certainly in the future, there's a chance that the Missouri team in the future has less talent. So even if you're just prolonging the inevitable, given this team this year, giving yourself a chance to be a part of the postseason, especially when Barry Odom seems to be building some momentum with that program, that would seem to be kind of a good thing. Will the NCAA reconsider its initial sanctions? I honestly don't know that. But if you can delay this in a roundabout way, that may actually end up being a win for the program, especially in this age of transfer portal stuff where a lot of guys may be looking to leave. And, of course, Odom's already talked very openly about what Jeremy Pruitt's tried to do, reach in there and grab some of his players. I guess there was even some stuff the other day. Michael Carvel was telling me that Alabama's kind of gotten involved on some of that kind of stuff as well. Kirby Smart has vowed to be hands-off, not going after any Missouri players. There's a couple I wouldn't mind having at Georgia. But nonetheless, That's what's kind of going on. Missouri going to appeal its sanctions. It may not get relief from those, but it may prolong this long enough to play in a bowl at the end of the season. I thought that Andy Staples from Sports Illustrated had an interesting profile of Felipe Franks, essentially casting him in a bit of a hero's role for Florida this year. If you're involved in the sports internet discussion, you may be familiar with the meme about Joe Flacco, the former Baltimore Ravens quarterback, and the question of whether or not he's elite. That's kind of one of those things that's been around the sporting internet world for quite some time. I'm starting to think there may be an SEC version of this conversation as well, and it's got nothing to do with the word elite. I think it's really funny to hear some Florida fans and Staples, the national writer, treat treat Felipe Franks as if he's good. Is Felipe Franks a good quarterback? And I know what you're going to say. B.A., you're a Gator hater. You're not qualified to even answer this question. That's fine. I'll step out and let other people answer this for a second. But looking at the stats here, this is the guy that's being treated as one of the reasons why Florida is going to be a top 10 team once again here in 2019. His completion percentage for a year ago, 58.4. His yards per attempt, 7.6. Touchdown to interception ratio, pretty good, 24 TDs, 6 picks. But I'm honestly not sure. Does that make him a good quarterback? Maybe it does. I'm not 100% sure on that. One more point that I want to get to, and we'll probably end up talking more about this on DawgNation Daily tomorrow. I love when ESPN has its way too early top 25, and they look at specific issues facing those top 25 teams. Well, if you look at the top two teams in the way too early ESPN top 25, it's Alabama and Clemson. The latest piece up at ESPN.com right now is what's the most pivotal game for all these teams upcoming this season. Do you know that for both Alabama and Clemson, it's the same game? It's Texas A&M, and I was thinking before, Texas A&M also plays Georgia in November. There's a really good chance when the real poll comes out a little bit later on, you're going to have a chance of those three teams, Alabama, Clemson, and Georgia, being 1, 2, and 3 in the official AP preseason poll. How often has it been that a team, Texas A&M this year, will potentially play all three of the top three of the preseason AP top 25 in the same season? Now, Connor Riley pointed out to me before the show that that's not only true of Texas A&M. This year it's also true of South Carolina as well, who even some DawgNation Daily listeners have told me, you got to check that schedule, BA. That's a murderous schedule for the Gamecocks, and it is. So maybe this happened more than I think it has. But two SEC teams, South Carolina and Texas A&M, have a really strong chance of playing the preseason 1, 2, and 3 in the same season. I don't know what you do with that, but it's at least it was interesting to me anyway. We'll make that your SEC through. Okay. I do want to mention one thing about the Tyler Simmons stuff, but I'll do that in just a minute, and the ongoing Tyreek Stevenson situation. I'll do that in just a minute. Let me go back in time. Earlier in the show, we were talking about as Georgia goes back to spring practice today. I was talking about some of the interesting issues that I think that Georgia's facing heading back to the practice field. We talked about Trey Hill and the fact that right now Kirby's coming about as close as you can to endorsing him as a center, not closing off that competition. There's still going to be some push coming from some of the other guys in that so-called committee. But Kirby had some nice things to say about Trey Hill. We talked about Kearis Jackson, the role that he's going to play in that wide receiver competition. I think being back in the practice field today, in the brief window I get to watch, those wide receivers, you better believe that's something I want to be looking at. One of the other things that Kirby Smart was asked last week, and we'll continue to examine this, and there's some really good stuff from both Mike and Chip up at DawgNation.com on this, what's going on with the backup quarterback? There was a reporter on Tuesday that tried to get some of Kirby Smart's thinking, and as you're probably not surprised, Kirby pushed back on giving away too much. Here was that exchange.
You just talked about Jake. Could you tell me who's going to get the most reps behind him?
Yeah, the two quarterbacks are going to get reps behind him. DeJuan Mathis and Stetson Bennett are both going to get a ton of reps. To say most, I don't know that we could say most. They'll get the same amount behind him. But those two guys will be working, as well as John Setter, who's one of our walk-ons, that'll get reps as well.
So I think this is an interesting issue, probably not as interesting as Justin Fields a year ago, because Fields brought a good degree of celebrity status with him into the program. But Mathis and Bennett are so different that the competition between the two, I think, is going to be pretty fun to watch. Mathis is obviously a really impressive-looking athlete. He looks the part, but maybe needs to learn some of the extra facets of playing the quarterback position. Bennett maybe just the opposite. He doesn't necessarily look the part because he's not very tall, but when it comes to playing quarterback, Georgia's players who've seen him in practice do it say, this guy can get the job done. So the contrast between Bennett and Mathis, I think, is really interesting, and Georgia needs a backup. Hopefully not for a lot of games, but maybe for the occasional spell here and there, and that battle between Bennett and Mathis, I think, will certainly be worth watching. All right, so I tried to prolong this as long as I could, but I do want to say one thing when it comes to what you've seen emerge over the last couple days with this so-called chaotic scene in the Athens bar that led Tyreek Stevenson and Tyler Simmons both facing these disorderly conduct charges. I have a couple confessions to make on this, and I'm not quite sure where this is going to land with everybody, but it's something that I that I want to mention nonetheless. I'm just not really that scandalized by this based on what we know on this subject right now. Now, maybe we may hear more details later on. Maybe we may find out that some Georgia players acted violently towards some civilians. At that point in time, I'd be kind of turned off by that. But just on the basis of this right now, this is not yet enough for me to be scandalized. I think there's something to be said for not always caring about what everyone else is concerned about. There are going to be plenty of people in the national media who are going to tell you, oh, Georgia fans, you got to worry about what's going on in your program. You got to worry about Kirby Smart's leadership. But I don't necessarily think that you do. I mean, if we want to live in the real world here before, I mean, I've been with friends in downtown Athens. I've seen them get in trouble with the law for minor things that they've probably forgotten about now. Does that make them bad people? That's the same thing about the Georgia players who kind of got mixed up on Saturday night. When I was 18 years old, I got taken to jail. I got a ticket for going 101 miles an hour in a 65-mile-per-hour zone. They put me in handcuffs and not handcuffs, but they put me in the back of a police car and took me to jail. I mean, listen, growing up, there's a lot of that kind of stuff that's going on. We may find out more details that make this a bigger deal, but for me right now, I'm just not that scandalized by it. Maybe I should be. We'll find out. The one thing I can't have, though, is my players going to the emergency room for what happened there. That's the one thing that apparently happened to Tyler Simmons that I'd rather not have had take place. Nonetheless, 878 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. It's our Gator Hater Updater. We'll see you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily. And on video. First of all, great job by Connor Riley today. First time on the official broadcast of DawgNation Daily. Thought he did a terrific job. And as we transition here to our R.S. Andrews cool down, I hope you'll check out my friends at R.S. Andrews. Heating, air, plumbing, electrical. They don't get mixed up in any kind of nefarious stuff in downtown Athens. They're just too busy taking care of your home and all the systems that make your home operate the way that it's supposed to. So please make sure you check them out at rsandrews.com. They will do good things for you. Air conditioning, this time of year especially, you got to get that thing tuned up and checked up. And it gets hot in Georgia, y'all. It's going to be like 75 degrees here on the weekend whatsoever. You're going to turn your air conditioning on. If it doesn't work, your whole family's going to be complaining. Don't get caught with that. Go to rsandrews.com and get that thing. Just make sure because right now we're in that kind of period of time where it's warm in the day and cool at night. And you can kind of get away with really either your system's not working great. As long as it's one thing one time and then like cooler than that the night, you can kind of get away. But y'all, we're going to turn the corner in a couple days, a couple weeks at the latest. It's just going to get hot and stay hot. And at that point in time, you better make sure that AC is working. So rsandrews.com to make sure on that. So to kind of keep the theme of confessions going for a moment, there was a few years ago when I had some friends and we rented one of those like really nice RV type buses. You know what I'm talking about? Like almost like the kind of thing that a rock band would travel in. We rented one of those, like 40 of them. So everybody chipped in just a little bit of money. And we took it to one of the games. This is like more than 10 years ago. And so at the end of the game, you go downtown and there's a line of people waiting to get out. And some of the people may have had a beverage in their hand. And as they're walking out, like the Athens police are just right there. And they're just like, they're just ticketing everybody that comes out, given that, just ticketing over and over and over and over again. So I didn't get a ticket because, listen, I don't behave nefariously. But I certainly plenty of good friends that night walked home with an open container charge. Now that's something that's not even illegal a lot of the places you go now. There's a lot of places around Atlanta that don't even have open container laws anymore, but still illegal in downtown Athens. So a lot of people got ticketed for that. My point here is I have seen firsthand the thorough nature with which the Athens police does its job there in downtown Athens. And I think that's a really good thing for the most part. Listen, I like visiting New Orleans, but I wouldn't want to see downtown Athens become like New Orleans. I just wouldn't. And so I think aggressive police for the most part is a good decision there. But I also think from time to time, young people are going to get caught up in that. That's part of the learning process for me. That's part of growing and learning in life for me. So I think that's all a really important thing. nonetheless, if we find out more details, my overall opinion on what happened with Stevenson and Simmons may change. As it stands right now, this is not something that raises the level of being a scandal for me. I don't like you going to the emergency room. I feel like in that instance, if you've had to go get medical treatment for something that happened, things probably went a little too far. But nonetheless, it is what it is. So you can kind of weigh in on that and anything you want to discuss from today's show as part of our R.S. Andrews cool down. Let me also mention this. We're going to get off the air kind of semi on time today because we have a really cool thing coming up a little bit later on. Before we head to Athens and do some good stuff with Georgia practice, we're going to have a very special first and what we hope is a reoccurring video series here at DawgNation. We're calling it our DGD. Of course, you know what DGD stands for, a representation of some of the greats to be a part of the Georgia program, not just for what they did on the football field, but for what they're doing in life in general. One of those guys is a friend of ours, the former receiver Terrence Edwards. He's going to be with us in studio today for a long-ranging conversation, looking back on his Georgia career and what his time at UGA meant to him. A little more insight into who Edwards is as a person, and some great stuff from Terrence looking ahead to some of these terrific 2020 wide receivers and some of the guys that he's worked with individually. This is really fun and good stuff from Terrence Edwards. So we'll have a great episode of DGD with Terrence a little later on this afternoon around 1 p.m. on the DawgNation video channels. I hope that you'll join us for that. All right, with that said, let me pull up here and kind of get going on some comments. And, of course, we appreciate you all being with us here today. Let's see what the Facebook comment says. John Anthony says, and on video, killed the radio star. Yeah, listen, I think most people would say I have a face for radio. So so there's that. Al Birchfield also pointing out when it comes to Stevenson and Simmons that the bar itself pressed no charges. And I don't really necessarily know what that means, but that does, I guess, carry some weight with me on this. And I'll also say this. Some of you are going to assume, well, B.A., you're just a Georgia guy. You're going to defend Georgia no matter what. If I found out that one of these two guys or any Georgia player was an instigator of violence towards somebody else, I'd want the law to press charges, right? I mean, I'd want them to face criminal charges for that because I want anybody who does something like that to face criminal charges. My thing is, I think we see a lot of examples in sports right now where when we push sports itself to be the judge, the jury, the punisher, more so than the law itself. And a lot of times we get ourselves in some trouble. There's a couple high-profile instances in college football recently where the media was pushing the institution to do one thing, and the court of law came back with a very different verdict. I think that's a really important thing to remember in situations that were much more serious than what these Georgia guys are going through right now. Steve Banks, congratulations. He says, I just realized I'm a top fan. Things are looking up. Steve, that's good to know. Thank you so much. That's a good thing. Let's go over here and get some YouTube comments here as well for a moment. Find out what our YouTube audience is thinking. By the way, do you agree with me on the whole Sanford Stadium deal? I think that Sanford Stadium's a pretty cool venue. I'm assuming that it's not going to beat the Big House in this For the Win USA Today bracket thing. I'm assuming it won't win just because the Big House is a more famous stadium. But I guess that's also kind of part of my point is that Sanford Stadium is pretty famous, but probably better than its level of fame would lead you to believe. So I'd love to have you weigh in on your thoughts on Sanford Stadium, too, for those of you that go to games regularly. Andrew Hughes says, will Kenny McIntosh be an impact player when he gets to Athens, BA? Andrew, I think that's a really good question. I think that there's always going to be, assuming everybody stays healthy, a running back who gets caught up in the numbers game just a bit. And this year's version of that, I think, may be McIntosh. Now, I know the one thing that a lot of people think that McIntosh brings to the table, his chief value is that bruising style down near the goal line. I'm a believer, as Georgia looks to improve its goal line offense, and we know how bad of an issue that was for Georgia a year ago, that you actually don't need more bruising backs, although it's not bad to have one. I think that's an example of an area where I think you need more creative play calling. I think Georgia's got to throw the ball more at the goal line, not towards the back corner because that's kind of a low percentage play, but some good safe throws near the front of the goal line across the plane there. That, to me, is one of the main issues facing Georgia and improved goal line offense. So apart from that role from McIntosh, and we can debate if that's even going to happen for him, I think he's just going to get caught up in a returning to health Zamir White and a put up or show up, kind of a, show me what you got year for James Cook. Brian Herrion's already proven he can play the running back position at the SEC level. My guess is one way or another he gets greatly expanded role and a good bit more carries this season, whether he's the number 2 back or just a number 3 back. So that's a lot for McIntosh to deal with. That doesn't mean that McIntosh himself won't be a good back, but we've seen examples. Holyfield waited and emerged in 2018. Harrigan has waited, likely to emerge in 2019. Kenny McIntosh may be the next back on that track, because as it stands right now, the guys that I just mentioned before, certainly in the case of Harrigan complimenting Swift, I think that's likely to happen. I think that Zamir White is going to be on the field in some capacity, and I hope there's a role for James Cook. I think it's problematic if there isn't. I hope there's a role for James Cook, and at that point in time, you may just not have enough carries or enough opportunities to go around for Kenny McIntosh. I think that'll be maybe a fair point to make. Brian Kephart says Kyrus Jackson has strong hands and a physical frame on a speedy, tight route runner. Yeah, there are a lot of reasons based on that profile alone that Kyrus Jackson could be a player for Georgia. I also think that, could Kyrus end up having a special teams role for this team in one of those return spots left vacant by McCole Hardman? I'll be watching that pretty closely too. But I think that Kyrus is a really interesting prospect. I do. And I think that, one of the things that you hear a lot from scouts when they're watching these NFL guys, and I don't care that much for the NFL draft, but I do like listening to scouting language, and that willingness to go across the middle is something that seems to show up a lot for NFL scouts when they talk about future NFL wide receivers. Does this guy show a willingness to do that? Well, Kyrus Jackson ain't afraid of that. First of all, Peach County is, as a high school program goes, about as tough as they come. Kirby Smart compliments Peach all the time, and with good reason. And Kyrus Jackson, given the fact that he can lay lumber about as well as he takes it, I think that's pretty interesting to think. Will Marlowe on the subject of linebacker saying, "I hope to see Quay Walker and Kobe Dean on the field." So also Nolan Smith there, a part of that as well. And I think they're going to have, certainly a strong opportunity to do that. I do. I think that linebacker competition is going to be pretty intense. Scott Harris says, "BA, freshmen should have a curfew. I did as a freshman in Delano in '84. Why not? Should freshmen have a curfew?" Let me give the answer that pops in my head first, and I may let Connor weigh in on this a little bit later on and see what he thinks about this. But here's the answer that pops in my head first, and I may change my mind on this after I talk for a minute. So let me just kind of talk out loud on this, and we'll see. I'm in favor of as few rules as possible. I'm not in favor of a lot of rules in general. I think the more rules you add, the more opportunities there come for rules to be broken, and the more you move towards something that's a zero tolerance policy, I think you're just asking to be challenged. I used to be a teacher, so I understand a little bit something about this, and I think part of the way to have good just management of people in general, whether it's children, college students, or adults, is to not really have that many rules, but have a couple of things that you really, really care about. And I don't know. I think there's also something to be said for not always caring what other people think. Let me go on kind of an old man tangent for like 4 seconds, and then I'll veer this back. I think that Tom Izzo this week, the Michigan State coach, did a pretty good job of embodying what it means not to care what other people think. Izzo got some criticism for how he coached one of his players during the first round of the tournament, and to some people that's a legitimate criticism, which I'm not here to debate one way or another. My point is, Izzo didn't care and just kind of moved on from it, which I think is important for us to remember, that we don't always have to care what other people criticize us for. And I think in this case, as much as I love Mark Richt, and Connor Riley wrote a very interesting piece contrasting the Richt era to the Smart era at DawgNation.com this morning. I hope you'll check that out. As much as I love Richt, I do believe that Richt at times was way too guilty of caring what other people thought. I think he was way too guilty of saying, "Oh my gosh, we had an issue. I need to be publicly seen as trying to handle this issue." And when you do that, you simply just hand power over to somebody else to stand in judgment over you. And once someone gets that power, they are never going to relinquish that, at least not without a fight. They're going to be more than happy to lord that over you forever. Is Richt doing enough? You can make a case that Richt was doing far more than most other coaches were when it came to this kind of stuff, but he was the coach that had the lost control of meme out there on the internet. Because once you showed that you cared what other people thought, other people were going to be more than happy to tell you what they thought about everything that you ever did. I think that Kirby Smart empowers himself by not caring what the media thinks, not really caring what, other people think. I think there is an art to just not giving a rip. And I think that that's what Kirby Smart's doing. And I think the same thing goes when it comes to a lot of these kinds of rules as well. I don't want a bunch of little rules. I want like one or two big rules. And for me, that's about all that I want. Now, I realize that not everybody's going to agree with that. And I think there is room for some disagreement on this subject. I do. And I'm not saying it's a bad idea to have a curfew for freshmen, especially when by law, they're not supposed to be there anyway. But this kind of gets back to my thing of, if there's a law that says you're 21, you're not supposed to be there, then I don't need a rule that says you got to be in bed by 11 p.m. I've already got a law to handle that. Does that make sense? Maybe even if you don't agree, does my opinion make sense? Connor wrote about this. I'll give you a chance to weigh in now.
Yeah, as far as, having a curfew and putting more rules in place, in general, I agree with you. I don't think it's a good policy to have because, the rules are only going to get broken. And, if you have players missing curfew, that's just another thing Kirby Smart's going to have to deal with and get questions with. And, as a media member, which we both technically are, I do understand how some in the media, want to hear more from Smart and criticize him as such and not being totally transparent. But I also see it from Smart's point. Like, you don't need to go and answer all these questions all the time. You don't need to go ahead and try and put your face out there. At the end of the day, Georgia fans, and I sort of wrote this, Rick's problem wasn't just that his players were getting arrested and getting into trouble. That his players were getting arrested and getting into trouble, and they weren't winning enough to, put it away. The exact line I use, Georgia wakes up on December 8th this year with an SEC championship and a college football playoff berth. No one's going to give two rats about Kirby Smart's player discipline.
And let me push back on just one thing a little bit, or at least add some slightly different flavor to this. There are plenty of things that I care about more than football, and there are plenty of things that I care about more than Georgia winning. Plenty of things. I just don't care about this more than winning. Mm-hmm. As I said before,
right.
If we found a video, and I hate to paint this picture, but just as for instance, if we found a video where two Georgia players were beating up some dude or something like that in kind of an unfair situation, I'd want those guys to face criminal charges for that because that's wrong. But so far, the description I have in my mind of what happened with these particular Georgia players, that to me just seems like something that happens a good bit. I don't want you going to the emergency room for it, but honestly, first of all, boys are different than girls to begin with. And boys, when they go to college, are going to behave different than girls to begin with. Here's my guess. I know that Nate Silver did a study about this at 538.com when it comes to NFL players. My guess is if you pulled 100 undergraduate males at random and followed them over the course of the year, my guess is you would occasionally have months where 4 of them got arrested in the same month.
Yeah.
My guess, I'm talking about 100 males, undergraduate students at UGA. I'm going to put these names in a hat. I'm going to follow them over the course of the year. I think that it would not be unprecedented to have months where 4 of them got arrested in the same month.
Right.
Because that's listen, when your son goes off to college, he just acts different than your daughter does. That's just life.
I don't think you're even. I think you're.
In general, males are more aggressive than females. It
doesn't mean females don't get in trouble.
If you give me 100 males at random, 100 females at random, the 100 males at random, I believe. Now I don't have the stats to back this up, so maybe I'm wrong, but I feel confident. 100 males at random are going to produce more arrests than 100 females at random over the course of a 4-year college career.
All I'm going to say is that I have a sister in college right now. It's not, her experience is not wildly different than mine. As far as, the other big takeaways, I mean, for the most stuff, these arrests, they're minor. It's a bar fight.
Yeah.
It's, not having a renewed license.
Yeah.
It's not sexual assault. It's not armed robbery. If you really want to make a big stink about this, go ahead. I'm not going to stop you. But, I think these are all sort of isolated incidents and not, the issue of something larger.
Well, here's the thing. And we actually talked about this on a DawgNation Daily episode like years ago. Do you know, and some of you who are either law enforcement officials or lawyers yourself can weigh in on this. So have you ever had the thing where you go to the gym and you're wearing like gym clothes? And I think it's common sometimes to not have your, at least I think it used to be probably, common. If you're just putting gym clothes on, maybe you forget your wallet. You know, if you get pulled over without your wallet, you can go to jail for that.
Yeah.
And when I used to do DawgNation Daily from my home before we did this on video, I'd take my very young children at the time to go stay with their grandparents. And sometimes early in the morning like that, there were more than one instance where I forgot my wallet. Had I gotten pulled over without a driver's license, I believe I could have been arrested, or maybe I was required to be arrested if you were driving without identification. So I just think it's important to note that what Jaden Hunter ran afoul of, I mean, I'm not unguilty when it comes to stuff like this. I had my driver's license expire for like 3 or 4 months and didn't even realize it because, first of all, your driver's license lasts for like 4 years. Now, I don't know why Hunter's license was not valid, but when it comes
I know why.
Huh?
So your license, the license you get when you're 17, 18 years old and you first get it, expires when you're 21. Imagine he'd recently turned 21, hadn't renewed.
Yeah, that seems like a very reasonable.
Something I did.
Yeah,
right?
very reasonable thing for me.
Yeah.
But when you're an adult or like a full-fledged adult, I mean, your license is good for years and years and years. There's no alarm that goes off because it's just a piece of plastic in your wallet. There's no alarm that goes off when it's expired. So, like I said, all that stuff is just not this particular stuff. Now, I don't even really know that much about the Brini situations. I'm not gonna comment about that one way or another. But all of this stuff for me is just kind of by the way, Will Marlowe says when it comes to curfews, no recruit wants a curfew in college, and I think that probably would hurt you in recruiting just a little bit. Somebody else also asked a more football-centric question, so let me talk about that for a minute. I remember the question. I don't remember the name, so let me try to find the person who asked it. Anyway, I forgot who asked it. I can't find oh, it's Derek Smith. Derek Smith says, BA, do you really think that James Cook is going to be the number 3 back? He's a James Coley recruit starting the season at number 2. Is that out of reach, he asks? Obviously, I would hope it's not out of reach, but based on the evidence that I think I understand right now, partially given the fact that Cook's dealt with an injury, partially given the fact that Cook was not really a big part of the conversation a year ago at all, right now, I'm just hopeful that he's in the competition for the number 3 back. And I'm not saying that means I don't think that James Cook is a good running back. What I'm telling you is I don't know. And I want to compare that for a moment to Elijah Holyfield. Think back to 2016 for a moment. Holyfield hurt his ankle before the start of the 2016 season. Then we kind of didn't see him for a while. But there were plenty of practice reports coming from that summer that was like, hey, Elijah Holyfield looks good. Elijah Holyfield looks good. In 2017, Holyfield was only, the number 4 running back in the Georgia roster, but he averaged like 7 yards a carry. Brief window of time. We saw him play. He was productive when he played. And he was also really good at G-Day for the extent that matters to you very much. As it stands right now, we just don't have that evidence with James Cook. That does not mean that he won't be a good running back. But in terms of those, I'm a fan of the phrase, success leaves clues. People on their way to success will give you hints that they're doing that. I need to see some more clues for success when it comes to James Cook. I'm not so much critical of Cook on this as I am critical of maybe Georgia should have just found a way to use him more last year. But as it stands right now, my confidence level in Cook is not all that high because I'm just not hearing anything. Put your ear to the ground. I just don't hear anything on James Cook.
What's your point on using Cook more, though? So are you okay with taking away touches from DeAndre Swift?
Yeah, there's always a trade-off. So I totally get that. There's always a trade-off. My point, though, is there's 2 different ways to not play. There's the not play of wait till you see this kid get a chance, which is what you kind of heard about Elijah Holyfield a bit. I remember specifically having those conversations on DawgNation Daily about, hey, Holyfield may not play, but he looks pretty good. So there's a way of doing that when you don't play. The Cook version to me was more the other one. Hey, maybe it just isn't a deal. You got 2,000-yard backs, and there's just not room for anybody else. But, I mean, what have you heard on James Cook? I haven't heard enough on Cook.
That's probably a fair point, but I would also add, last year in addition to Holyfield and Swift, you have Brian Herrien competing for carries. This year you're going to have Zamir White competing for carries. It's a crowded, talented room. Now, I do think there's been some talk of moving Cook to the slot position, which I think this spring, given that Tyler Simmons is apparently in a hospital and there's not a whole lot of real depth at that spot right now, I could certainly see him, maybe on G-Day, him getting reps at that slot wide receiver position.
Yeah, so that was the other thing I was going to say. When I say, use him better, I guess, or use him more. I guess in my mind I was thinking he didn't necessarily have to be at the running back position. I mean, I remember going back to the recruiting trail, especially out in Oregon, where the opening used to be in Cook's recruiting cycle. I remember there being a debate about whether or not Cook really was a running back. I mean, he's Dalvin Cook's brother, but this is not Dalvin Cook. This is somebody who's a little different than that.
He's smaller.
He's smaller, but he's also fast as lightning. You know, I realized there are like 9,000 people vying to be Georgia's slot receiver. I realize that is a line as long as the Scream Machine right now to be Georgia's slot receiver. But I don't want to hear. We can be candid on this, R.S. Andrews cool down. I better not be talking about transfer portal for James Cook in May without them giving us a shot at slot receiver first.
That's probably fair.
And I'm not saying that's going to happen, but
right. You'd maybe want to see him try and make it out at running back because there's just not, if he moves to slot receiver, that's A, a bad sign for his ability as a running back, and B, if he's in slot receiver, that means he's taken away touches theoretically from guys like Tyler Simmons, Dominic Blaylock, maybe Demetrius Robertson. So that is something you have to worry about there as well.
Jake Kennedy says, why is Demetrius Robertson not the slot position? I think you may have just mentioned that too. Maybe I missed that. So I'd heard some rumblings that he had practiced there a little bit. And I got to tell you, I think that's bad news. If Demetrius Robertson's your slot, if he's playing on the inside, unless you're going to do the Art Browse offense and throw, to a slot receiver 50 yards down the field, if that's where he's lining up, that is, to me, is a loss for Georgia, and that's not Robertson being used to the full complement of his capabilities. I want that guy running a 9 route every single time. I just want him lining up as close to the sideline as you can and running as fast as you can, as far as you can, deep down the field. And I want him to do that every single time. I don't need to see a route tree. I don't need to see anything from Demetrius Robertson. I just want him to use his blazing world-class speed and run way down the field. And as an inside receiver, I don't think you see as much of that. So Jake says, why not Robertson there? I wouldn't rule out the fact that he does that. But if he does, based on my vision of what I think I want the Georgia offense to look like, I'll be a little disappointed if that's the case. He
was working more as an outside wide receiver last year, and I think that's what he's going to continue to do this year as well. As far as, wanting to run the 9 route every time, I differ from BA a little bit philosophically there. I think you can get a lot of value by putting a really good athlete or a guy who just knows how to get open using his, his speed or his acceleration, like a Robertson. But right now there is a void, especially at that slot position, when you see guys like Terry Godwin go on to the NFL, you see Mecole Hardman go on to the NFL. So, Holloman's obviously going to be an outside receiver who sort of fills that position that was vacated by Hardman and Godwin. And, my answer is Dominic Blaylock. Reality is he's not here right now. He's coming in May.
Yeah, to me, all right, so Jake follows up on this. He says about Robertson, he'd be a matchup nightmare, but I'd rather him be on the field in a slot position than not on it. Am I wrong for saying this, though? And I think that Jake's right, and I would agree with Jake. If that's the only place to get him on the field, then that's where I'd want him to be. And so on that point, Jake, you and I agree. But I feel like, Georgia's right now got to replace 3 receivers. It's going to replace its top 3 pass catchers overall, and when you add Godwin into that, the number 2 receiver the last 3 years, you got to replace 4 big-time pass catchers for you from a year ago. So you're actually looking for new players at a lot of different spots here. I think the outside receiver positions right now are more difficult to fill than the inside receiver position is going to be. So
I think that's more just because it's unknown. What kind of player is Georgia getting in Lawrence Cager?
Yeah.
When is George Pickens going to be here, and how quickly is he going to be able to assimilate himself into the offense? Because I believe, Robertson getting in as late as he did and knowing that he was going to be a part of the 2018 team as late as he did in August, I think that sort of set him back a little bit. I certainly agree with you there. There, other than Holloman, who's probably the only truly known pass catcher Georgia has right now in terms of what he can give you. There are a lot more questions at outside receiver than inside.
Philip Jordan Wells says, "BA, you can't run the 9 route all game long." Y'all know I'm kidding about that. That's an exaggeration.
Do we, though?
That's an exaggeration to make a point. I do want to see Georgia throw deep more this year. I do want to go a home run on a good bit more occasion than Georgia did before, but not every single time. And Robertson potentially has more value than that.
You strike me as someone who, if and when you played Madden, you'd run 4 verticals a lot.
Pretty much. When I played Tecmo Bowl growing up, back then you only had 4 plays in the whole game. So I was always the Raiders like everybody else was. And my thing was, whenever time I got close to scoring, I would always want to have Jay Schrader, who was the Raiders quarterback in the original Tecmo Bowl. Have you played the original Tecmo Bowl on like the original Nintendo Entertainment System, the 8-bit graphics and everything like that?
No, I don't have a dinosaur.
They still sell these things now, though. No. So my thing
play NCAA football, like a real kid should.
Right. My thing always was I would want to run Jay Schrader into the end zone just because I was fascinated by the fact that you could create a fifth play if you ran Schrader into the end zone. But anyway, the point here is, you can't do that every single time. I'll acknowledge that. But the other point I wanted to make is when it comes to filling out these spots, of potential pass catchers, the only two names right now that I can say I can fill in with some certainty is that Holloman is one of the outside wide receivers and Werner is either the tight end or one of the tight ends on every play. Those are the two names I can fill in with certainty. I have very high expectations for J.J. Holloman. I don't know if he's like a future first-round pick at wide receiver. I don't know if he's that good. But as a college receiver goes, I believe that Holloman has proven himself to be really good. My guess is he'll be even better in 2019 than he was this past season. So I have very high expectations for him. And then I feel like that leaves you with, in a three-receiver situation, that leaves you two other receivers right now that are very much up for grabs. And so yeah, I mean, I think right now your guess is as good as anybody in terms of who those other receivers are going to be.
Right. Yeah.
Let me get a few more comments, and we got to get out of here. Boy, I said we're going to get out of here early. Robert Barnes says, BA, you aren't talking to the right people. Cook has been playing several positions on offense and the return game. Well, I hope you're right, Robert. I would love to see that be the case. Will Puckett says, we also have to think about the 2020 season. Arian will graduate. Swift could enter the draft. Fromm can enter the draft. We are potentially looking at a very inexperienced backfield to start 2020. That's not a concern for me because I have no problem with freshman running backs. I believe that your two leading rushers in 2020. Ooh, I shouldn't say that. Let me back that up. I feel like at least one of your two leading rushers in 2020 is not currently on the roster.
Interesting.
Yeah, I feel pretty confident.
So you don't feel confident then in James Cook?
No, I don't want to get pinned into a corner on that. I'm just gonna make the statement and let it stand how it is.
All right.
I feel like one of Georgia's two leading rushers in 2020 is not currently on the roster.
I will say, there might be a very legitimate reason to be concerned about the 2020 offense being very young in a lot of key positions.
Yeah.
There's a very good chance Fromm leaves. That means you're probably starting either Dwan Mathis, a redshirt freshman, or Carson Beck, a true freshman, unless Georgia brings in a graduate transfer quarterback. You're probably going young or at least inexperienced. I mean, I imagine Zamir White, assuming he's healthy next year, which is a big if given his past. He doesn't have a ton of experience. And then you could be losing both your starting left tackle and right tackle in Andrew Thomas and Isaiah Wilson, as we talked about today. I mean, Georgia's offense could be very green in the 2020 season, which I think puts only a bigger emphasis on why and how Georgia has to win a national title this year.
I think Connor's right about that. I do think there's some pressure to get that done now. I think the original commenter who said you got to be paying attention to 2020, that's not wrong. At a lot of different positions. The offensive tackle positions may be the key for me on that because you can't control the Fromm thing all that much, and there is something to be said for if Fromm plays well enough to put him in that discussion to be a first-round pick, then you probably reap the benefits of that in 2019, which may make the trade-off in that worthwhile. But you still got to field a team in 2020. The one thing you do have some control over is getting future tackles ready if Wilson and Thomas depart, because I think you can be young at a lot of positions, maybe even quarterback, although I guess that wouldn't be my preference. But I think you can be young in a lot of positions as long as you feel okay about your offensive line.
Right.
Which means for me, if Georgia's up 21, if Georgia's up 28, I'm looking to get Cade Mays involved.
At left tackle.
Yeah, I'm looking to get him involved at that left tackle spot. I am a real hopeful guy that because of the fact that Ben Cleveland entered college as a younger high school senior, even though he's a redshirt junior this year, a lot of guys would leave. I'm hopeful that he sees the value in staying another year, and I'm hopeful that he competes for one of those tackle spots too, which is the position we thought he was going to play at the beginning of his Georgia career anyway. Now, I also think that, Georgia's getting Broderick Jones right now. We saw Andrew Thomas be a starter as a freshman. Jones could potentially do that as well, but that is another young guy. And, Connor, you heard him, give some words of praise to Tate Ratledge, not a Georgia commit, but a guy that Georgia could potentially get. So you may have some help on the way at the tackle position. But if you're going to be young at some important positions in 2020, if you can at least have veteran offensive linemen, I would feel okay about that.
Right. And, Georgia did bring in 2 tackles in the 2019 class, Warren McClendon, Xavier Truss. They weren't the highest-rated guys. I mean, I don't think anyone thought Isaiah Wynn would be a first-round pick at left tackle when Sam Pittman arrived on campus, but when Wynn graduated, that's what he was. So, it's certainly fair to think that Pittman is more than capable of developing those guys into stalwart, offensive tackles that you would like. And as far as, I know Jeff has talked a little bit about Wilson leaving. I think he's going to have to make some significant strides this year, just because he's the biggest player on Georgia's team in terms of height and weight. But in terms of bend and flexibility, he's going to have to improve to sort of bump his draft stock to where it would probably be worth going to the NFL draft early.
But, I mean, one thing that has made Kirby a little bit different from Saban is, for the most part, when Saban's juniors leave, they get drafted in the first round. I want to say it's 70, 80, almost 80%.
Less than that.
Is it less? But it's far
I had
more.
7 guys leave early this year, and other than Jonah Williams and
But up to this point, it's far more. More than not, right?
I'd probably say maybe it's a little south of 50-50.
That doesn't feel like the number that I had in my mind on that. But either way, Kirby, other than the crop that stayed after 2016, you look at some of these guys this year. I mean, some of these guys are not in a great draft position necessarily right now, and they chose to move anyway. So, either there's a new mindset around a lot of college football players right now, or maybe it's just something at Georgia in particular where if guys have a chance to go to the NFL right now, they're choosing to leave, which I don't necessarily fault. Different people have their own, own decision-making process when it comes to that kind of stuff. Maybe some of these guys in particular didn't feel great about what they were returning to at Georgia, were they to return, injury concerns and everything else. Wilson probably wouldn't quite be in that discussion, but it's fair to point out you can't always get these guys to make what you think is the logical decision. By the way, Matt Rukavina mentioned being up in Lexington, talking about the Kentucky Sports Radio folks. I wonder how much they were sweating out. I had Wofford beating Kentucky. My guy for the Terriers goes, 0 for 12 from 3? How do you miss every 3-point shot you take? If I get any of those 3 points from this, if I get any of these 3-point shots from this guy, if he's making any buckets whatsoever from outside, I feel like I got a chance to come in here and brag on a Wofford upset. But I can't get any help. I can't get any help whatsoever.
No, I mean, Kentucky's not going to the Final Four because P.J. Washington's not healthy, so you won't have to worry about that. But
So it'll be interesting to see what the radio waves of Kentucky Sports Radio sound like once Kentucky drops another tournament game, and then Calipari takes the UCLA job. Joel Moody says Bo Jackson was Tecmo Bowl gold. Yeah, he really was. I'm no fan of Auburn, but I have to say, did y'all ever play? Now, Connor talked about playing the most recent EA Sports, which I guess was 2013 was the last year of that game. 2014 was the last year of that game. To show you how old I am, I actually played the first EA Sports college football game. It came out in 1993, and back then it was called Bill Walsh College Football on like Sega Genesis. Let me tell you something. That was pretty fun. And you had, I think you like a lot of these games do, you had like the regular teams. It was all the teams from 1992. So the Georgia offense was great. Find yourself a copy of Bill Walsh College Football on Sega Genesis. The Georgia offense was Zaire and Garrison Hurst and Andre Hastings. You got no beef with me when it comes to that offense. But they also had the 1980 Georgia team, which was really fun to use Herschel Walker. And they had like the 83 Auburn team, which had Bo Jackson. And I got to say, I would occasionally play that 83 Auburn team on that game because I like running the ball with Bo Jackson. I really did. Charles Kaiser says Bill Romanowski was a beast on Tecmo Bowl. I actually saw Romanowski at the Super Bowl a couple weeks ago. Let me get a few more. We've got to go. Gosh, it's late. Let me see if I can go get them. Let me get a few more comments, and we'll go fast. Let me get some YouTube comments. Get out of here. Crow King 123 says, I'm rooting for LSU in the tournament. I guess I have a grandparent who loves LSU. I'm partially rooting for LSU in the NCAA tournament just to watch like the the self-righteous powers that be squirm in their chair every time LSU wins a game. I am definitely there's a part of me that wouldn't mind seeing LSU win just for the pain that it causes for the Ivory Tower NCAA folks. Scott Harris says, be an Athens outing coming. Yes, we're going to have one soon. Now, we're going to be in Athens today, but we don't have time for an outing today because this is a quick trip for work. But we're going to do something in Athens, Scott. I promise you we'll have something fun to announce on that coming up in hopefully sometime really soon. By the way, going back to the whole topic with Alabama, Jacob Thompson says Mac Wilson's not going to be a first-round pick. That kid got bad advice. Yeah, I wouldn't really know how he ranks in that NFL draft conversation, but it sounds like you feel pretty confident about what Wilson's going to do. Will Marlowe on the subject of leaders. That's something else that I think we're going to watch unfold a little bit in spring practice to come is Kirby's push for that leadership. He talks a lot about that. And I do think that those player leaders are really important. I think it's probably, as I've said before in the show, it's interesting to see that crop now emerge from guys almost exclusively recruited by Kirby Smart, whereas previous leaders, I think, were guys that came to the program through Mark Richt. So that's kind of an interesting baton being passed from the previous coach to the current coach. I also think just given the very specific demands that the Georgia culture puts on players and the fact that that has now been in place for a while, I think cultivating new leaders may actually be a little easier now than it one time was. All right, so I think we got to go. I apologize for not taking more comments, but I'd love to stay here all day long if we could, but we got to get ready to go. We are back today at 1 p.m., though. Fun interview coming up with David Green, or I should say Terrence Edwards, as a part of a really good DGD series we'll be doing on the DawgNation video channels. We're also going to be in Athens later on. Eyewitness account of spring practice back here tomorrow morning for DawgNation Daily. Jeff Sintel also later on in the week. So for those of you who look forward to having Jeff here on DawgNation Daily, we'll hope to catch up with him a little later on in the week. That's all coming up. Y'all have a great day. Thanks for being with us as a part of DawgNation Daily.